Yes, I'm just about to start. Glad you
All
could
right,
join us.
perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last session of the day, our OCTEA Border Affairs / NEPA session. Our first speaker is Maria, and we will go ahead and let Maria get started. Maria, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Cisneros. I work with the U.S.-Mexico Border Program in our office located in El Paso, Texas. I've worked with the program for approximately 15 years. When I first started my career at EPA, within my first year, I did have the honor of working with EPA's American Indian Environmental Office, AIEO, in Washington, D.C. for a couple of months. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and being from the Southwest, I had some general knowledge of tribes. But I think it wasn't until the work I did with AIEO and now with the Border Program that I really began to understand the work that Indian tribes do and the challenges that they face. I do want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. In my presentation, I will present to you the history of the U.S.-Mexico Border Program and how over time, how and what type of role the tribes took on within Region 6. Please note, within Region 9, participation by the tribes may work slightly different. And there are other activities that tribes in that region do that don't quite apply to the tribes within Region 6. So this map shows how EPA and Semarnat Semarnat is Mexico's Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. They're our counterpart in Mexico. It shows how we define the U.S.-Mexico border region, which for us spans approximately 2,000 miles from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. It covers 62 miles or 100 kilometers on each side of the international border. The border region is made up of 2 countries, 10 border states, 4 in the U.S. and 6 in Mexico. Within our program, we recognize that there are 15 pair of sister cities. In addition, there are 26 U.S. federally recognized tribes within this border region. Two of the 26 are within Region 6. In the past 30 years, population has grown rapidly with an estimate of 15.2 million people in the border region. About 8 million residents in the U.S. and about 7 million in Mexico's border municipalities. The U.S.-Mexico border programs are led by EPA and, as I mentioned earlier, Semarnat, which is Mexico's Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. Our border program stems from the 1983 La Paz Agreement signed by U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Mexico's President Miguel de la Madrid. The agreement that was signed in La Paz, Baja California, designated EPA and Semarnat as national coordinators of a border-wide program, which again, as I mentioned before, designated the border region to be 62 miles north and 62 miles south of the international border. The La Paz Agreement, through 5 annexes, created 6 border-wide work groups. These work groups were focused in specific areas of the environment, dealing with water, hazardous waste, air, emergency response and contingency planning, cooperative enforcement compliance, and pollution prevention. Now, this slide, for example, shows the timeline of each iteration or start of the border programs. In the slides that follow, I'll go further into details into the mission and goals of each of these programs. But a few things I do want to point out that I won't go further into detail. One of them is in 1984, EPA opened 2 border offices that exist today. One in El Paso, Texas, the other in San Diego, California. Also, another key milestone in 1994, with the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, 2 binational institutions, the North American Development Bank and the Border Environmental Cooperation Commission, were established to help communities with environmental project development and financing along the U.S.-Mexico border region. And I mention these because these 2 institutions, which have since Since 1984 have merged into one institution, the North American Development Bank. But EPA, our border program, works closely with this institution to help us implement and/or finance environmental projects in border communities and in tribal lands.
Maria, we're not seeing your PowerPoint. Can you try to share your screen again?
Sure. Give me 1 second. You know what? I see that.
Now we can see it.
Okay. So let me just go back one slide. I won't repeat what I said, but it was important that I did want to point out the timeline. So like I had mentioned, this slide does show the timeline of progression of the different border programs. We have had, we're on our fourth iteration of the program, and we are set to launch a fifth one, Border 2025. And again, as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about each of the programs in the presentation. So the first binational border program, the EBEP, the Integrated Border Plan for the Mexico-U.S. border area, was signed in 1992 by both countries. It was focused on enhanced regulation and resulted in significant investments in infrastructure along the border. Although the binational environment did improve, many projects were implemented at a federal scale, and the program recognized the need to address environmental and health concerns on the border with additional local stakeholder involvement. Now, EBEP was operated at a federal to federal level, meaning Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. And it included the goal of increasing communication between the two countries, exchange of knowledge of regulations, and prioritizing resources to the border. Through a series of binational stakeholder meetings held within the 2 years of the implementation of the plan, the result of these meetings led to the development of a comprehensive plan, which would go on to form the framework for the Border 21 program. Now, EBEP hoped to show the state of the U.S.-Mexico border to get a better understanding to outline the issues that exist. The EBEP plan was actually very limited in identifying the priorities of tribes. In fact, the only mention within the plan happens to be with the Campo Indian Reservation and Jacumba that dealt with issues for solid waste. Now, in 1995, Border 21 was launched. Its mission was to promote sustainable development in the border region by seeking a balance among social and economic factors in protection of the environment in border communities and natural areas. The program established a 5-year bilateral effort, which included additional federal partners to achieve its goals. It engaged the 10 border states and the U.S. tribes and included 40 public meetings to solicit input and identify local priorities. Border 21 established 9 border-wide work groups to address transboundary environmental issues, such as water, hazardous waste, air, again, emergency response and contingency planning, cooperative enforcement and compliance, pollution prevention, environmental health, environmental information resources, and natural resources. While the work groups implemented pilot projects, benefiting communities, the program objectives remained very broad in nature, meaning that we didn't get as much local input as we had hoped. The program outlined 5 geographic regions of how EPA and Semarnat would work. California, Baja California, Arizona, Sonora, the New Mexico, Texas, Chihuahua region, the Texas, Coahuila, Nuevo León region, and Texas and Tamaulipas. The development of the program came through a series, again, as I mentioned, of public meetings along the border, and we hope to implement and increase public participation. public participation to build capacity, and decentralize the environmental management to augment the participation of state and local institutions in implementing Border 21. Because of the 9 work groups established, again, Border 21 hoped to ensure interagency cooperation to really maximize resources, to make sure there were no duplication of efforts, and to strengthen coordination among multiple entities of the border. Again, however, Border 21 was still very much operated at the federal level of EPA and Semarnat headquarters, along with the regions, in Region 6 and Region 9. Now, participation of U.S. border tribes in environmental issues with the U.S.-Mexico border region was minimal until May 13, 1999. At that time, a document called the Coordination Principles was signed in Ensenada, Mexico, by EPA, Semarnat, the 10 border states, and representatives of the 26 border tribes. The document, as it came to be known, as I mentioned, the Coordinating Principles of Border 21, this actually officially recognized the participation of the tribes as partners to the program. The key statement in this document read, U.S. Indian tribes are sovereign nations, and all Indian communities in the border area have a long tradition of stewardship of their border region, which calls for their active participation in the Border 2012 program, work groups, and task forces. And I mentioned Border 2012 because that's the next iteration of the program that I'll talk about. Now, the Coordinating Principles document really set the stage for both federal governments, the U.S. and Mexico, to look at the priorities of the 26 federally recognized tribes along the border and also the indigenous border tribes in Mexico. So the Border 2012 program kicked off in 2003. One of the biggest changes I'd mentioned before, this is the 3rd border program that was implemented, was the fact that the tribes in the U.S. and Mexican states officially agreed to be partners with EPA and Semarnat to carry out the program. Its mission was to protect the environment and public health in the U.S.-Mexico border region, consistent with the principles of sustainable development. The Border 2012 program also emphasized a bottoms-up approach. That is, it involved the locals, the 15 sister city pairs, in the process of priority setting, decision-making, and project implementation. The principles help to support the program missions, ensure contingency in the program, and continue successful elements of previous border programs. Under this program, there were 6 goals and 25 objectives within these 6 goals. The goals of reducing water contamination, addressing air pollution, addressing land contamination, improving the environmental health, especially as it relates to pesticides, reducing exposure to chemicals as a result of accidental chemical release and/or acts of terrorism, and improve environmental performance through compliance, enforcement, pollution prevention, and through environmental stewardship. The coordinating structure of the Border 2012 program changed significantly from Border 21. The U.S. and Mexican national coordinators are still led by EPA and Semarnat, as defined by the 1983 La Paz Agreement. But the federal agencies hope to implement a program recognizing that not all the environment and public health challenges along the border are the same border-wide, but can differ from one region to another. This created 4 regional work groups that basically still exist: California, Baja California, Arizona, Sonora, Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua, and the Texas, Coahuila, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas region. The coordinators also understood that some issues would be border-wide. That is the same issue across multiple regions, and that some issues would need a continual dialogue on policy issues. Hence, the border-wide work groups and policy forums. Last, we understood that issues are not the same border-wide and priorities would differ. The program offered the opportunity for local task forces to be created to address each of the goals and objectives. Now, since Border 2012, many of the 20 to 30 task forces that were created all along the border region continue to operate today. These task forces are coordinated through the 4 regional work groups. Now, within Region 6, there are 2 border tribes of the 26, the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas. The other 24 tribes are within our Region 9, and our San Diego border office works and coordinates activities with them. We are very close to both of these tribes and work over the years have worked with the different key environmental staff of each tribe. So currently we work with Evaristo Cruz and Barbara Valdivieso and also Judith Puente of the Kickapoo. Now, one thing Region 6 did, separate from what Region 9 did very early on in the implementation of Border 2012, is that we made sure that our tribal partners were part of both our regional work groups' leadership. Now, the regional work group are multimedia and geographically focused and emphasize regional public health and environmental issues. Oh, excuse me. They coordinate activities at the regional level and support the efforts of local task forces. Each regional work group has 1 state and 1 federal co-chair from each country, and in the case of Region 6, a tribal co-chair as well. Now, the role of the regional work group is to identify and prioritize regional environmental issues, to recommend issues beyond regional scope to be addressed by border-wide work groups and/or policy forums, to work with border-wide bodies to address those issues. And then beyond the co-chairs, the regional work groups are broad-based and include representatives from local communities from both sides of the border. As previously stated, there are 4 regional work groups established, 2 in Region 9 and 2 in Region 6. So this slide covers the border region of Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua. So this regional work group covers from the New Mexico, Arizona state line all the way to about the Big Bend area in Texas, and it includes the Mexican state of Chihuahua. The regional co-chairs are, for EPA, our regional administrator. For Semarnat, it's the federal delegate for the state of Chihuahua. For TCEQ, it's the commissioner. For NMED, it's the secretary. And for the Isleta del Sur, it's the governor. Our other regional work group is the Texas, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, Nuevo León regional work group. And here in the red, it highlights what that regional work group covers. Again, that one takes over where the other regional work group left off, which is around the Big Bend area of Texas, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And this actually includes 3 Mexican states, again by the name, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, and Nuevo León. Again, this regional work group is led by our EPA regional administrator, a federal delegate for the state of Tamaulipas in the case of Semarnat, the TCQ commissioner, the chairman for the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas, the secretary for the environment for the state of Coahuila, the secretary of urban development and environment for the state of Tamaulipas, and the secretary of sustainable development for the state of Nuevo León. Now, under Border 2012, a number of task forces were created to address the specific regionally and community identified concerns, to implement site-specific projects and/or address specific concerns. The task forces are led by 2 co-leaders, one from the US and one from Mexico. Task force leaders are participants that are selected based on the specific issues or local initiatives that need to be addressed. Here, I want to highlight that in this regional work group, we developed 9 task forces, and the 7 that are highlighted in yellow are those task forces that the Isleta del Sur Pueblo participates. So I realize the time here. Our next regional work group, this was actually broken up further into 3 task forces. And again, this is geographically based because this regional work group actually expands a wide geographic area and a number of municipalities. In the case of Kickapoo traditional tribes, they participate in the local task force of Amistad in the Amistad area. Now, there are a series of projects and significant events that took place where tribes are concerned. The first was in 2009, where Isleta del Sur Pueblo actually became a partner to one of the local emergency plans between the cities of El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juarez, and Sunland Park, New Mexico. For our region, actually, this tribe was the first to be a part of one of the local plans. We also, through our program, give out funding. Most of our funds are meant to be used for capacity building. So the funds are limited in terms of purchasing equipment. So our goal as it relates to our type of funds is that we hope that it bridges the gaps that perhaps other funds that the tribes get may not be able to meet. One particular grant was given out to, actually the Isleta del Sur tribe applied for it and received a $25,000 border grant. And they did this, a video to describe, to discuss the proper use and disposal of recycling, hazardous waste, and automotive products. We think this one is actually one of the key successes of our program because the project benefited not only our tribes, but also the DVD that was developed was distributed to the other 24 tribes within the border program, but I believe it was also shared with other tribes beyond the border. Throughout our program, the tribes have developed a series of reports identifying specific tribal priorities, actions, and recommendations. So the ones you see on the slide are the ones that were developed between the 26 tribes. These reports were presented at either national coordinating meetings or regional work group meetings. As you can see, a variety of priorities are raised by the tribes to the national coordinators through these reports. Our current program, Border 2020, began in 2012 and was set to end in 2020, but due to a series of delays, either because of elections, change in administration, both the US and Mexico, the program has extended to part of 2021. What's different between 2020 and Border 2012 was that there is one less goal. There was 5 goals with 23 objectives and 6 key fundamental strategies. The program went down. It actually combined the border-wide work groups and policy forums to only be policy forums. So there were 5 policy forums based on the 5 goals of the program. The 4 regional work groups continued, as well as all the task forces from Border 2012. In terms of accountability and how you learn more about the program and the types of projects that were implemented, we did this in the form of action plans, which highlight over 500 types of activities and actions from the various border stakeholders, including the tribes between Region 6 and Region 9. Sorry. Okay. Again, under our Border 2020 program, the Isleta del Sur Pueblo did apply and receive a grant. Under this grant, again, waste management and something that they wanted to address. With this grant, they were able to do over 33 cleanup and mitigation activities that included the collection of scrap tires, e-waste, and also the distribution of recycling bins to over 225 homes. So this is the new Border 2025 program, which normally under circumstances would have already kicked off. Basically the planning and implementation program, this is the timeline. In November 2019, there was a key leadership meeting between EPA and Semanat in Mexico City. From there, they'd actually laid down the timeline of how the Border 2025 program would be rolled out. Between that meeting and winter of 2020, we drafted the framework document. Last fall, we did the first set of tribal and state consultations. In the summer of 2020, we also did the rollout of the draft framework document to the public for comments. And since then, we have been looking at just finalizing the document and basically waiting for our leadership to sign off on the document. So give me 1 second here. What's going to be new with the Border 2025 program is actually it's going down to 4 goals: air, water, waste, and emergency preparedness. We still have 20 objectives to address under each of those goals. Instead of policy fora, we're calling them policy work groups, but they will do similar roles that the policy fora and border-wide work groups did under Border 2012. We still have the 4 regional work groups, but now they're called coordinators, because really what they do is exactly that: coordinate. The task forces that started from 2012 and continued through 2020 will more than likely continue to Border 25, with the exception of those that were started because of enforcement and compliance. Some key things to keep us accountable is we have a set of action plans, again, where we highlight the key priorities and activities of how we implement the program and how we'll reach meeting the objectives and goals of the program. We'll have a mid-program report, and finally a closeout or final program report, hopefully by 2025. So in summary, here's just a very brief historical set of actions of how the role of the tribes developed within our program. First, it was the 1999 coordinating principles, a series of tribal reports that were developed, a series of tribal meetings actually that were held, environmental issue letters that were sent to EPA. They've also been witnesses to the signing of the Border 2020 program, and as well as sometimes the GAP and the GAP projects that they implement are actually in line with our program, with the Border 2020 program. Again, they sit as co-chairs for our regional work group. They attend bi-monthly team meetings that we hold with each of the regional co-chair staff. They attend, present, and sometimes host task force meetings. We make sure that we are do the tribal consultation process that EPA has in place, and we definitely promote having the tribes apply for the border grants. So with that, I know because of time, I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the end and see if there's any questions. The last couple of slides was that we did want to recommend that we hope that our tribes in our region, that they use since our funding is very limited, that hopefully our funds is used in such a way that it also supports the activities and priorities they've outlined within their own strategic plans or work plans in their GAP funding. And that's it.
Thank you, Maria. I don't see any comments in the chat box here on this end. Do you see any in yours, Maria?
Let me see here. I just see a comment from a Monty Scamahorn. He asked, as of 2011, the Fort Sill Apache has an official reservation in Luna County, New Mexico. Although the tribe is headquartered in Oklahoma, it also has borderlands in Cochise County, Arizona. Is there a way to be involved in the program? I definitely would say yes. I think one of the key things is making sure, and I'm sorry, right now I'm blanking out. If it is in Luna County, I believe it does fall within the 62.5 miles that the La Paz agreement has outlined, and Cochise County, I think that is a border county, if I remember. Those really is, if the tribe is within that area, we highly definitely want to work with you. And again, for Cochise County, Arizona, our Region 9 office is the one who works with those tribes, and I'd be more than happy to provide you the contact for them. In terms of Luna County, again, if we look at the map, if it does fall within our border region, our office would definitely be the person, the place to start.
Thank you, Maria. Also, if you're calling in, you can send an email to me and I will forward the question on to Maria. So we will go ahead and move along to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Kamika Price with EPA Region 6. Okay, the floor is yours, Kamika.
Thanks, Karen. And also thanks for the opportunity to present on public engagement in the process for lead federal agencies' proposed NEPA projects. As Karen said, my name is Kamika Price. I am an environmental engineer in the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA program, as a project manager. I've been in the NEPA program for around 8 years. I will discuss the public engagement process specifically related to environmental impact statements. And that would include where to find environmental impact statements, the scoping component of the process, and we'll look at several NEPA projects that are still in ongoing process. So let's begin. Next slide. Environmental impact statements filed by the lead federal agencies can be located at the prescribed website on the slide. You can search for any environmental impact statement that's open for public comment. All environmental impact statements are filed with EPA, and EPA publishes a notice of availability each week in the Federal Register. The environmental impact statement database contains records of all EISs received by EPA since 1987. Also, it contains EPA comment letters on EISs since 2001 and electronic versions of the environmental impact statements received by EPA since October of 2012. So just want to make a note, EIS is also a reference to environmental impact statements. EPA's EIS database includes the project name, the lead agency, where the proposed project location will be, the date comments are due, contact person for the lead agency, and other information. Also, I want to make a note that on the same web link that's on the slide, you can find other helpful information regarding what is NEPA, what is the NEPA review process, how citizens can come in and participate in the NEPA process. You can also find EPA regional NEPA contacts, NEPA policies, and other information. Let's look at some recent NEPA projects. Next slide. Agencies are required to provide meaningful opportunities for public participation. Key opportunities for citizens to get involved in the NEPA process include when an agency begins the NEPA analysis and when a NEPA document is published for public review and comment. Since the NEPA processes differ among federal agencies, it is important to review the agency NEPA implementing procedures. These procedures determine the specific steps in the NEPA process where there are opportunities for public involvement. For example, some methods used by an agency to inform citizens of the NEPA process or actions include publishing in the Federal Register, agency websites, and other notices in the newspaper, or they can do direct mailing. The scoping process provides an opportunity for citizens to provide an input on the range of issues to be addressed in the development of the EIS. If an agency determines that an environmental impact statement is required, a notice of intent is published in the Federal Register, which initiates the scoping process. On this slide, you guys, we did provide that information link where you can find the scoping portion or notifications in the Federal Register. The notice of intent provides a description of the proposed action and a description of the scoping process. And this can be anywhere from any scheduled meetings and how the public can get involved. Agencies use different methods to conduct scoping. They can use public meetings, conference calls, formal hearings, informal workshops, and opportunities to submit written comments. Let's look at the following projects that went through the scoping process between January 2021 through April 2021. We have the Skeleton Creek Solar and Battery Storage Project that's in Oklahoma, the East Lateral Express Project that's in Louisiana, the Highway 112 Widening Project in Arkansas, the Jefferson Davis Electric Transmission Line Project in Louisiana, Laredo Air Branch Facility in Texas, the 399 Extension in Texas, and also we had the national project that covered several states within the U.S. with the Surplus Plutonium Disposition Program. So let's also look at environmental impact statements. Next slide, please. The following draft environmental impact statements were filed by the lead federal agencies between the latter part of 2020 through the present. We have the Mid-Barataria Settlement Diversion and Draft EIS. That project was led by the U.S. Department of Army Corps of Engineers. It's located within Plaquemine Parish in the state of Louisiana. And the proposed action consists of placement of sediment diversion through the Mississippi River, the New Orleans to Venice Hurricane Protection Levee, and other parts of the Mid-Barataria Basin. Next slide, please. Also, you have the revised draft EIS for the Upper Baratarian Basin feasibility study, also issued by the U.S. Department of Army Corps of Engineers, same area in the Plaquemine Parish of Louisiana, and it's going to look at the risk of damage from flooding events. Next slide, please. Also, we had the Integrated Non-Native Invasive Plant Management Draft EIS. This EIS was led by the U.S. Forest Service, located in a massive, kind of vast area of South and Central New Mexico. And also this project looked at controlling the spread of non-native invasive plants in regards to the National Forest System lands. Next slide, please. Also, we looked at the draft environmental impact statement for the Coastal Texas Protection and Restoration Feasibility Study, led by the U.S. Department of Army Corps of Engineers. This was a vast project that covered 18 coastal counties along the Gulf Coast and bayfronts in the Texas coastal zone. The proposed action consists of reduction of risk of coastal storm damages to natural and man-made infrastructure, as well as the goal to restore degraded coastal ecosystems. Next slide, please. Also, there is the draft EIS for the Texas Gulf Link Deepwater Port License Project. It is led by two federal agencies, It is a joint action between the U.S. Coast Guard and the Maritime Administration. The proposed project area is the Brazos County in Texas. This proposed project consists of the construction, operation, and decommission of a deepwater port in the federal waters southeast of Freeport, Texas. Next slide, please. So those are some of the recent projects in regards to EIS that I wanted to share at this summit. Are there any questions? And I'll check my chat. Nothing for me, Karen.
Okay, I don't see anything in the chat just yet. Thank you, Kamika. Let me check my emails real quick just to make sure.
Okay, and just while you're checking, on the last slide, we did have our staff director, Robert Houston, who leads our NEPA program here in Region 6, as well as the other staff, NEPA practitioners, Michael Jancy, Eli Martinez, Gabe Gruda, and Keith Hayden.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see any in my emails, and I don't see any just yet in the chat box. So thank you, Kamika. We appreciate it. We will go ahead and move on to our third presenter, Mr. Keith Hayden with EPA Region 6. We will start sharing your PowerPoint in just a second. And Hayden, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me just fine, Karen?
Yes, Keith, I can hear you.
Perfect. Well, I think I have the coveted last time slot of the day, which is usually when everyone, if we're in person at a conference, is trying to figure out what they want to order for dinner. But seeing as how we're all home, maybe you're still thinking about dinner. I'm not sure. Okay, and Karen, I can see my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Well, yes, as Karen said, my name is Keith Hayden. I work with Kamika in the NEPA section in Region 6 in Dallas, Texas. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of what we will go over today. I'm just going to give you a brief couple slides on the history of NEPA, different types of NEPA documents, and then how tribes are usually involved when it comes to NEPA, and then how they can comply with NEPA, and then at the end there will be some time for any questions you have. And I see here I wrote question and answer session. I'm not going to guarantee answers, but if you have questions, we will hear those. Next slide, Jason. Okay, sorry to test you out like this, and hopefully you paid attention to Kamika's presentation. So this is just testing your own knowledge. What does NEPA stand for? And I'll give you a few more seconds to read through. And I will tell you the correct answer is C. Probably the other one that most people guess all the time is A, but C is the correct answer. All right, next slide, please. And now let's get into the history. Next slide, Jason. Okay, so the National Environmental Policy Act, it was enacted in 1969, became law on January 1st, 1970, and signed into law by Richard Nixon. And it may shock you, but it unanimously passed the Senate. And I don't think you can say that about many things that go through Congress these days. So there was pretty overwhelming support for this law when it was signed. and became law, and it sets goals for protection and of the environment, and then enhancement of the environment, and provides a way for federal agencies to implement those goals. Next slide. Here I just have the parts of the law. If you ever wanted to read through, if you were maybe having trouble sleeping and you wanted to read the exact parts of the law, I have those listed for you right there. The CEQ NEPA regulations are what all the federal agencies follow, and then each federal agency has their own NEPA regulations. And so you can see EPA's are at 40 CFR Part 6. Okay, next slide. So you've heard the term NEPA review. How do we even know that needs to happen? And so it's when a federal agency develops a proposal or receives a proposal that triggers a major federal action. And in the slides, that link is clickable, and it will take you to the definition, which is on the next page. Next slide. Here's how the federal government defines major federal action. And I have never been able to memorize this definition because it doesn't read very, very friendly. Next slide, please. The easiest way to sort of think about what is a major federal project or what triggers NEPA, I guess in the simplest terms, it would be, is the action taking place on federal lands or affecting federal lands? Is it requiring a federal agency to issue a permit? Or is the federal government giving funds towards an activity? Those are sort of the three triggers that we look at to see if NEPA is required. And I think it's the easiest way to sort of remember it. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly get into the three different types of NEPA documents. Next slide. And here they are. Kamika mentioned them briefly. There's the categorical exclusion, which we just simply call the CADEX, the environmental assessment, and finding of no significant impact, so the EA FONSI, and then the EIS there. Next slide. CADEX is that is sort of the, I guess, the easiest environmental document, NEPA document to prepare, and it's for actions that have been determined by federal agencies to have no significant environmental impact. And so these are actions that are taken routinely and over time, and there's been no impact, and so the agency can document that so that they aren't having to do a very detailed analysis every single time one of these actions come up. Like I said, you don't have to do a detailed environmental review for a CADEX, but you do have to sort of exercise some oversight to make sure that the conditions of the categorical exclusion has been met. And almost all federal agencies have lists of CADEXs, which list what actions are sort of excluded from that detailed review. Next slide. The next sort of step up in terms of the rigorousness of the analysis is the environmental assessment. And that top bullet there provides analysis for determining if the action will cause a significant impact. It does do that, but later on I'll sort of get into a little bit about why that typically doesn't happen. Some agencies have required review timeframes for EAs, others do not. They just have a simple public notice requirement. And then if there is not a significant impact, an agency has to prepare a FONSI. Next slide. And then finally is the one that most people are familiar with. It's the environmental impact statement. Kamika went over some of those in the previous presentation, and these are the analyses that take possibly years to prepare. And the way it's sort of written in the federal guidance is if an EA is prepared and then they determine that there are significant impacts, then an EIS can be prepared. Or a federal agency can just say, hey, we know this is going to be a large project or have lots of impacts, and they'll go straight to preparing an EIS. And that is, 99% of the way that is the way it happens. The agency just skips the EA and does the EIS if they know there's going to be major impacts. Next slide. All right. If you come across NEPA or have worked on NEPA, I'm going to outline some of the ways you may have heard of that and just give you a few tips and pointers to make that process go more smoothly. Next slide. The first way is just as an interested party, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tribal related. Maybe you enjoy camping in a national forest and you see a notice in the Federal Register, or you see something in the newspaper about how they're going to allow logging in an area of the forest that they previously didn't, or and you want to comment. Or maybe you fish at a Corps of Engineers reservoir and you find out that maybe the boat launch that you previously used is not going to be maintained anymore, or it's going to be torn up for some reason, and so you want to comment. This is the way most just interested people can do that, and the way you can find these projects, one of the best ways, is you can set up a search in the Federal Register, and I have a link here to that, as you can see. Next slide. And this is just a home page of the Federal Register, and it's kind of small on my screen, but you can see you can search for like endangered and threatened and endangered species, but you can sort of set up your own search criteria. So if there's a county you're interested in, or a town, or a reservoir, or a national forest, you can set up a search that will send you an email anytime someone files a document in the Federal Register that has to do with your search terms. That way you can sort of stay on top of things. Next slide. This is the most common way tribes will become involved in NEPA projects, and that is their resources are being affected. And for the most part, when they become involved, it's going to have effects on current or historic tribal lands and resources. And the reason I underlined and had the word historic bolded is because, as many of you listening in are very aware of, is just because a tribe has lands in Oklahoma or South Dakota currently does not mean that that tribe always had a historic presence in that state. And so one of the, I don't want to call it common, but if a federal agency does make a mistake in consultation with a tribe, it's typically here. They will look at what is the current sort of, I guess, footprint of the tribal lands. And what they may not realize is just because an area does not have tribal lands now does not mean that there were not tribes there in the past who still care about that area. And so sometimes we have to remind agencies that they need to contact tribes who have a historic focus on an area. And another way that tribal resources can be affected, a lot of times federal agencies will just contact a tribe if on the cultural or historic artifacts that concern tribal lands or resources. But if a project is going to affect air quality or water quality or noise or quality of life, that is within the tribe's jurisdiction. to consult on that, and an agency should. Just because a tribe is not responsible for issuing a permit does not mean they don't have a concern. And so I just wanted to make sure and point that out, that a lot of people assume that tribes are just sort of limited in what they can consult on, and that's not true at all. It's, if it affects tribal lands in any way or resources, you can consult on it. Next slide. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Here is just a sort of a simple diagram of how people move through the NEPA process. And on the left, you can see it talks about a CE. That's the same as a CADX, categorical exclusion. And then in the middle is the environmental assessment, and on the far right is the EIS. And like I said earlier, an agency isn't going to spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars preparing an EA and then jump over to the EIS. About the only time that happens is if there's usually, well, I'll say usually if that happens, something went wrong or they did not anticipate such strong feelings about the project, and they will then go to an EIS if that happens sometimes. Next slide. So tribal NEPA actions. Next, I'm going to kind of get into how tribes have to comply with NEPA. Next slide. So gap grants. Unfortunately, those are subject to NEPA, the gap grants. Next slide. So back to talking about CADXs. Just because something falls under, it's eligible for a CADX, and you see, okay, there's no extraordinary circumstances with this project, it doesn't mean that the project can just be done automatically. You have to look at the cross-cutters. Next slide. And I went ahead and just listed some of the cross-cutters that EPA looks at when we're looking at a project to see if it affects resources. And so what I did is I listed the resource, so like wetlands or threatened and endangered species, and then I listed the law that protects those resources, and then the agency that is responsible for sort of managing those resources. And you can see some of those there. And then Jason, if you'll just go briefly to the next slide. Here's some more, deals with coastal zones. And not all these apply to every project or every tribe. You just sort of have to check to make sure. Obviously, if a project's in Oklahoma, you're not going to worry about coastal resources. Next slide. And that's the last page of cross-cutters that we look at. Next slide. So there are CADXs that don't require any documentation, and I guess the easiest way to categorize those would be administrative, generally in nature. And you can see these are the actual definitions, and you can find all these word for word at 40 CFR Part 6.204A2. I know it's a mouthful, that's why I wrote it out in the in the presentation. But it generally has to do with collecting samples or providing technical advice or administrative support. They're more procedural actions. Next slide. It's also actions involving emergency preparedness planning or training, or entering into international agreements that don't commit the United States to projects or actions. Next slide. And so a bit of good news is grants, gap grants that are just dealing with administrative or technical capacity are qualified for the CADX, and no documentation is required. So a small ray of sunshine there. Next slide. So if you do have a category of exclusion that does not automatically qualify and you don't have to have documentation, the next step up is the documentable CADX. And so here are just some of the things that are required, the pieces of information required for that documentable CADX. Next slide. I'm not going to get into this just because I don't want to read the definition on the screen, but things like mowing the grass at a facility or replacing an ice machine or something like that, or a piece of drywall, that some of those things are just very routine. They're not going to have a large impact, so that's a pretty quick thing. It's sort of, I guess, construction, minor construction, but it's that it's not going to affect the environment. Next slide. These next few bullets get into like for NIPD's permits and unsewered communities. And then there's also for first-time drinking water resources. If you're just going in and replacing existing pipe or something, that can be a CADX that requires documentation, but again, it's been proven to not have much impact. Next slide. And I just covered that. Sewer systems, drinking systems related to replacing existing systems, minor upgrades. It qualifies for a CADX. Next slide. And these are sort of the list of things that that do not qualify for a CADX. And these are some of the common ones that we see. Sort of someone may think their project qualifies for a CADX, but then we look at it and these are usually the ones that will trip them up. And they are also in those statutes as well. You don't have to memorize these or anything. But just creating a new discharge, trying to, if you are doing like wastewater treatment hookups, doing it for the purposes of expansion, that's a no-no. So that would require an EA or an EIS. So next slide. I briefly mentioned it earlier. These are the extraordinary circumstances, and these are two listed in 40 CFR. If any of these occur, you would have to proceed to an EA or even possibly an EIS. So having significant effects on any, air quality, threatened and endangered species, that sort of thing would lead you to have to prepare a more detailed analysis. Next slide. Here's some more effect on minority, low income, or federally recognized tribal communities. You would have to prepare a more detailed analysis. The third bullet here, it's a little iffy. Sometimes I see that go from an EA to an EIS if it's significant public controversy, but controversy in and of itself does not take something from an EA to an EIS, but it will take it from a CADX to at least an EA. Next slide. So as I said previously, grants involving construction do not qualify for a CADX. So tribal, if tribal gap monies are used for construction, it has to be done with an EA FONSI, even though that construction may be minor. It does not qualify for a CADX. Next slide. And these next few slides are just, they're things that must be in the EA. And I have completed a couple of projects with tribes on some minor construction projects. And usually when that happens, it leads to me asking a lot of questions. And it's because I need pieces of information to prepare documents to sort of justify the funds. And so the next few slides are just go through what is needed. You have to define the purpose and need for the action. Next slide. You have to discuss alternatives, including the no action alternative, which not taking an action doesn't, a lot of people say, oh, then, well, if we don't take an action, things will just be the same. But if you're considering something like the construction of a dam, well, if you didn't, or repairing a dam or a bridge, if you didn't maintain that infrastructure, eventually that would fall apart and lead to some catastrophic conditions. So the no action alternative does not sort of equal just doing nothing. Next slide. There we go. Sorry, my computer's running a little slow. You have to talk about the environment that will be infected and the impacts of the proposed action and all the alternatives, including the no action. Next slide. And then you need to talk about the mitigation you're going to consider. So how, yes, you may have an impact, but what are you going to do to mitigate that? And then you have to have at least a summary of how you coordinated on this project and did your due diligence and looked at those cross cutters that we talked about earlier. Is this going to have an effect on floodplains or endangered species, that sort of thing. Next slide. And then this is the last one, cumulative impacts. This is long-term productivity, unavoidable adverse impacts. This is sort of the last of the stuff that has to be discussed in an EA. Next slide. And then the gap grants and trial constructs do have their own alternatives to be considered before dollars can be allocated to a construction project. And it's in order there. You see rental spaces first, that's most preferable, and then mobile or modular purchase, and then buying or renovating an existing building, and then finally constructing a new building. Those are sort of listed from most preferable to least preferable hierarchy there in terms of what a project must consider. And so it also must state whether the construction activity requirements of 2 CFR 225, the purchasing of equipment and other capital expenditures. Next slide. So these right here are, on my screen it says viewing Jason White's application, but on that it says solid waste implementation, if that isn't showing up on your screen. So this was under the FY 2016 Consolidated Appropriations Act. These are solid waste activities that are allowed under that. And go to the next slide. Okay. And these are things that can be the description and examples of things that can be purchased. I'm not going to read that all out. You can go look at that if you like to, but there is one I want to call your attention. Slide. Actually, next slide. This is the one that I've dealt with, and it was new starting for 2016. It's the construction repair of municipal solid waste facilities. I've worked on a couple of these, getting funds allocated for that. Hopefully you can hear me. As I said, we're having problems connecting with the network. So if I cut out, Karen, just let me know. And so I guess starting in 2016, GAP funds could be used for the construction of facilities to handle municipal solid waste. But there's a general prohibition on that, so that it has to be approved by the AIEO director at EPA. And so it's something that can be done. Next slide. And I just stuck this in there. I have not had a tribal EIS at EPA yet, but Kamika sort of talked about EISs earlier, and here are the review timeframes associated with that. There's not a lot of tribal EISs. Most of them I see are from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they're more programmatic. They're like land use management plans. And so, but we have not had that, but this slide just sort of goes into the timeline associated with it. Next slide. Okay, so I started out quizzing you, and we're going to kind of wrap up quizzing you. See if you paid attention. What are the 3 levels of NEPA documents? And the correct answer is B, of course. And next slide. I have one question in my chat, and I guess, Karen, if you could check your emails, I'll go ahead and read out the question, or everyone. Well, it says to all panelists. I don't know if everyone can see that. Here's some contact names and helpful websites for you. I will go ahead and read, just in case you can't see the question that came in on my chat. It says, what if the tribe is doing the action on tribal trust land? Would the tribe be considered the federal agency doing a federal action when spending their own money for the development? Also, is the federal permit process the NEPA, or does, I don't really understand. It says, I guess issuing a permit requires NEPA analysis. So I'll try to break, that's kind of 3 questions. I'll sort of try to take them all separately. The first one, I'm not sure. I can get back to you on it. Does it make a difference if the tribe is doing the action on tribal trust land? And this is from Kim. Are you saying does the tribe have to then comply with NEPA if it's on their own tribal trust land? Karen, do the participants have the ability to unmute?
No, they do not.
Okay. Well, Kim, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you for typing in the chat there, Kim. I'll get back to you on the first one. If a tribe is spending their own money for the development, do they have to comply with NEPA? I want to say no. But I don't want, when you say spending their own money, I'm assuming that is not connected to any federal money, BIA money, EPA money, or anything. I want to say no, but I will double check on that for you as well, Kim. And then let me scroll up because the question disappeared. Compliance with NEPA is the federal permit process the NEPA. So the issuing of a federal permit before that happens, an agency most likely has to comply with NEPA. So what would happen, let's say, if someone wants to build a highway, and that highway is going to go through some wetlands and cross some rivers, there would be some stormwater permits that they would have to get from the state. There would be wetlands permits that would have to be issued by the Corps of Engineers, and then a whole host of other permits that would be done. And so there is almost always a lead federal agency that is designated by jurisdiction, or sometimes it's the greatest impact. Or if it's going, say, the highways, bordering a national forest or going through a national forest or something like that, then it would be the Forest Service. So there's different ways that they lead federal agencies determined. If it's, say, for instance, for tribal compliance, if EPA is giving gap funds to a tribe and the tribe wants to use that to construct some solid waste facilities, then EPA would be the lead agency. And yes, so issuing a permit and does require NEPA analysis, but it's a federal requirement. The tribe can provide information, but the compliance with NEPA, it's the federal requirement. And so if we were, say, EPA is giving funds, we would have to be the ones doing the NEPA compliance. It's not, the tribe would supply information, but it's not them having to go jump through all the permitting hoops. So the permit process. So does the permit process satisfy the NEPA? NEPA is part of that, but in order to issue the permit, usually NEPA has to be satisfied. So they're not the same thing, but EPA, if we had to issue permits, we wouldn't do that unless NEPA was satisfied. So NEPA is a lot of things. It's informing the public. It's taking a look at the impacts of the actions. It's considering whether an action should be taken, considering alternatives. It's a lot of things. It's a process. It's not just the permit issuance is just the very, very, very tail end of that process. So Kim, I kind of hope I answered your question. My contact information was in that PowerPoint. If I didn't answer your question, just please send me an email, and then we can have a phone call, and or I can do a little digging and then send you better answers. All right. Oh, here we go. Build a travel plaza and need an air permit. Does a FONSI expire? So if it depends on where you are. So just tribal funds would be used for a travel plaza, but you were told you needed an air permit. Let's see here. For an air permit, I would say it depends on where the tribe is located. Some states issue air permits. The federal government is responsible for others. Okay. Randy G, the ever helpful Randy G, just sent me an email, and he said, I don't want to take credit. He said, the question may be found in the BIA NEPA handbook on the question about tribal trust land. So Kim, if you I guess, consult the BIA BIA NEPA handbook, Kim, on that. Boy, I'm getting a lot of statements, a lot of comments here. I'm going through them. So, does a FONSI expire and have to be reassessed? No, but if a project changes over there's not like an expiration date on a FONSI. Some NEPA analyses, like the one that springs to mind for me, a lot of land use management plans, whether that's done by the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, those have to be reassessed every 10 years to see if conditions have changed. And if so, they have to sort of prepare a new analysis. So it's not really an expiration date, but some projects do sort of have a built-in reassessment period. But just for most FONSIs, once a project is done and then it says there's no significant impact here, then that analysis is over, if it's like a one-time thing. I have another one here. How or why is NEPA initiated or performed on a tribal project on tribal trust land where no federal money is being used? I think I said that earlier. I don't think it would be, unless there. I can't think of why that would be if it's on tribal land, tribal money, no federal money. I don't think it would, unless I'm not thinking of a circumstance. Maybe there's some far off impacts, not just a local impact, but I'm not sure what the project would be that would trigger that. I'm not sure what project tribes would undertake that would have that. So I think my initial answer to that would be no, it would not be required, but I'd like to check because I don't want to ever say something never happens or must happen. I want to check around to see. And I think that came from maybe Kim and then also Ty. So I'll get back to you on that one, just to triple check.
Thanks,
All
Keith.
right. So yes, you're welcome. I think that's all of the questions I have the ability to try to answer. But yes, Ty and Kim, I saw Kim said you will contact me. Thank you for that. It'll just give me a chance to do a little research, and I'd rather give you a correct answer later than just take a wild guess now and send you off with incorrect information. So same to you, Ty. If you could just email me, and I can be sure to get you a 100% correct answer. All right. Karen, was there anything else? Did you get any emails?
Nope, not yet. I didn't, but if anyone has any questions after the fact, they can send them to me and I'll be glad to forward them on to Keith.
Perfect.
So, do you see any other comments or questions in your chat box, Keith?
I do not.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you to our other presenters this afternoon. And everyone, don't forget to join us again on Thursday morning for the lead awareness and prevention session. And with that, we will end this session for this afternoon. Everybody have a good evening and thank you again.